Hello, welcome to the Viewpoint. I am Mamadou Mboj. Few would disagree that more women should be represented in our legislatures and in other national institutions where we take big decisions in this country, really. Yet I'm not sure if there's a consensus on the best ways to achieve improved outcomes. But one idea, a quota system for women in the National Assembly, has been swirling about for a while and becoming even louder in recent years, leading in fact to some countries adopting a quota system for women in their legislatures. So the question for discussion today is this: should the Gambia fast track gender quotas for women in the legislature, our National Assembly? My interlocutor today is a poet, and I understand ex-politician, anti-corruption activist, and all-round gender equality activist, actually. In 2018, she won an anti-corruption award bestowed by Africans Rising, a pan-African movement for justice, peace, and dignity, they say. She has been a fellow of the Mandela Washington Fellowship for Youth African Leaders and country representative of the Commonwealth Youth Council Limited. And she has been many other things as well, including being a CEO of a company. And believe it or not, I don't think she's even 25 years old. Lala Toure.
Thank you very much for having me, Mr. Mboj. It's such an honor to be on this platform with you.
Absolutely. I heard your discussion, let's call it that, on This Morning with Lamin Farr about these quotas or lack of that and stuff. Just go over, why quotas? For how long have you thought that quotas would be at least one of the strategies, one of the tactics we must, deploy in our fight here?
Right. So for the longest time, there has been a global recognition that there's a need for countries, for governments to actually be more intentional on measures and mechanisms that they introduce in to curb contentious issues like female representation in political leadership. So globally, there's been quota systems, the introduction of quota systems and other legal frameworks that are geared towards ensuring that women have spaces created for them to actually take part in leadership structures. Now, these quota systems recognize that there exist in societal patriarchal problems that actually limit or define what leadership is for both genders. So it limits the representation of women, even in cases where their participation is very immense. In countries, for example, like the Gambia, where records and data, you go back to the country's political history, shows that participation has been immense, but still representation is very low. So that is what quota systems were introduced to actually address, to make sure that women are given a representation in leadership structures to address the problems of low representation.
Absolutely. But you also realize that of course, now it's part of the zeitgeist, the spirit of the age, gender equality and all the rest of it. And you tend to have European, Western countries tend to sponsor these things all the time, all over the place. Yet when you look at their history, at no point have they ever had quotas.
That's actually an interesting thing, because I've actually had conversations a lot about pre-colonial Africa and patriarchy in pre-colonial Africa. A lot of the phenomenon has been that colonialism came with its own patriarchy. Yes, there is white supremacist patriarchy, but there was patriarchy that existed in our societies before the white people came. So this is not a white people's problem. And yes, they do have their own solutions to their own problems, and yes, they're supporting the consolidation of democracy and governance in African countries, the Gambia included, but that does not mean we shouldn't have our own conversations around the structures that existed before they came and providing solutions to these problems. Now, the global adoption of quota systems, it should, for me, if you ask me, it shouldn't really be a conversation about which countries have adopted it and which countries have not. I think the idea was to solve, to provide solutions to a problem that for the longest time has affected women and their participation or their representation in leadership structures. Now, different countries might come up with different frameworks.
Different ideas. That's it. But this is interesting. I'll stop you here again. You felt that before the colonial period there was patriarchy. I mean, people in the West will also tell you that they also had to go through this period of patriarchy. As it were, they spent a long time, if one remembers the vindication of the rights of women, Mary Wollstonecraft, 1890s in Britain, for instance. I'm only bringing this up so that we'll have a rich background of what we're talking about.
Yeah.
How concepts have played out in certain societies and how they may play out in others and the like. And perhaps over there, the social pressures that led to these ideas. Do we have these conditions? This is why I'm trying to explore this idea of patriarchy and quotas. So absolutely. So here you're saying that we have found ourselves in a situation where really to begin to tackle the problem, this is one of the things that we should do.
Yeah.
To the imbalance. Now, this is interesting. So what kind? We have seen the sort where it will be in the National Assembly, they've got their, what do you call it, female-only sort of constituencies, as in Uganda, I think. And you've got the other one where the responsibility is with the parties. Which one do you advocate? Right.
So right now we have the CSO Gender Platform, which basically is an umbrella body of women-led organizations that are focused on fighting for women's rights and seeking gender justice, actually. So we've worked together with some of the National Assembly members, and we've introduced a constitutional amendment bill. Now, what this seeks to do, similar to the provisions that we had in the draft constitution, 2020 draft constitution, which stipulated that there should be a provision that allows 14 seats to be allocated for women in parliament. So similar to that, the constitutional amendment bill also seeks to, if it goes through the parliamentary scrutiny processes and becomes a law, will provide 14 seats for women, 2 from each administrative area. So, and there would also be an inclusion of 2 seats for persons living with disabilities, which is also another area that people have been fighting for so long to ensure that there's, as a part of our transition into a more democratic dispensation since 2017, this has also been a cause of concern to ensure that PWDs, persons living with disabilities, are included to strengthen inclusive democracy.
Yes, so you will have constituencies that will be designated, as we said, women only.
Yes.
And another one with persons with disability,
yes.
that sort of thing. Okay. That's very interesting because, yes, when you spoke to have that discussion with Lamin, what did you think of his arguments, his reservations, his worries?
Right. So to start with, I think I agreed with what he said about the need to change societal perspectives of what leadership is, what female leadership is, right? Because like I said from the beginning, we live in a patriarchal society, whether we like to acknowledge it or not. And everything, including our political leadership structures, have been male-dominated for the longest time. So there is a need to change mindsets. There is a need to change societal narratives. But that it shouldn't just be limited to using that as a way forward. There's also a need to adopt other measures that are equally going to get us to the end result. So that was one thing that I disagreed with him a lot yesterday, but also the fact that he thought that women want the free right, you know, and that the equal, both men and women in our societies have a right to contest for positions, and women are not restricted. They're not told you cannot go and contest, so they shouldn't want a free right, which I disagree with a lot, because when you really look at a closer look into our political landscape for the longest time, the current constitution, the 1997 constitution, section 28, subsection 2, touches on the fact that both men and women shall have the same right to equal opportunities, socio-political and economic opportunities. But is that the case when you put it into our realities, our context on the ground? It is not. Women do not have access to these equal opportunities, whether it's politics, whether it's economic based, whether it's in our society. So when you say...
you realize that these things are ideals.
Exactly.
In many ways, most of our laws is almost like they're ideals.
Exactly. Exactly. So if you look a closer look at the political landscape, it is almost impossible for women, if things remain the way they are right now, it is literally almost impossible for women to have the equal representation that we are seeking, because it's not going to happen.
But you look around the world, that equal representation doesn't really exist much. I mean, we have to contextualize these things. And also, even when I look at this Gambia as well, I can see improvements. When I take, for instance, my mother's generation, you know, what I know of how I saw them live, what I heard them say, the mindset, I take my generation, and then now I've reached an age where I've got the next generation there. So I'm in the middle there. I can see improvements.
Gradual improvement.
There are gradual improvements. I mean, now women are so vocal, it seems, whereas before, not really. You know, you took the back seat, allowed the brother or who else. So these things are happening.
Well, I'll tell you for a fact, as a young woman who's very vocal, that these problems still do exist. And just because 1, 2, 3, or 100 women are vocal and are speaking out and are using their voices and are using their platforms does not take away the fact that these problems still exist, and there are hundreds and hundreds of other women that are still going through this in their communities, in their homes, in their workplaces, in their houses. Even us as vocal women, we go through these things in our workspaces, in the spaces that we share with our male colleagues. There are things that they say, how they address you, how they talk to you, that belittles you, and all of that. So it still exists. In as much as we are trying to use our voices to advocate for these changes to happen, we still need to acknowledge that this problem still exists. And yes, equal representation, looking at it in a global perspective, it has not been something that has been realized yet in any country, even the most advanced countries where democracy has been consolidated. But that should not be a benchmark or a yardstick to say, oh, this is something that has not been achieved, so, you know.
No, it shouldn't do that at all, but at least it will give you a good measure of this thing, the fight you are in, as it were. It's really very, very difficult. For me, one of my initial reactions was this: what about democracy? It's like you're imposing something on me. I want to choose whoever I want. Don't you see your idea sitting perhaps uneasily with this notion of democracy? I can decide whoever, and that's exactly how it works. Just as Lamin said, women, you can stand elections, you can contest. It's just that they've not been coming forward. We know the historical background, granted, and all of that. But again, even if we were to say to political parties, okay, you must put up 10% or whatever percent of your candidates, people may decide not to vote for them.
And I agreed with him yesterday that the electorate actually has the choice. They have a right to choose whoever they want to choose. And that in itself is a principle of democracy, allowing people to believe what they want to believe, to have, to be entitled to their own opinions, to their own perspectives of things, to have the entitlement or the right to choose who to vote for, who represents them, who serves them. But and yes, I do agree, political parties may choose to be intentional and put up female candidates, and they would not be voted in because of the patriarchy, because of our cultural mindset, which is why I also agreed with him that there is a need to be intentional in our advocacy approaches to change, gradually bring about societal change, the way people think, their mindset, their narrative, and the perspectives of what female leadership is. This is like a whole structure that has been built. And it needs to be dismantled. It needs to be crushed down. Until then, people are still going to be with the notion. Look at people's reaction when you talk about female leadership. Look at people's reaction when women come out to say, we are contesting for opposition. It's almost never about their qualification. It's almost never about their competence, what they can do, what their track record is. It's always about things that in no way have anything to do with what they can do, what they can actually deliver if they occupy that office of political power. And if you look at if you were to do a comparison between the times that women come out to say we're going to contest and the times that men come out to say we're going to contest, and how the public reacts differently to these two, then you would know that there is a problem that needs to be addressed. And it starts with having honest conversations at the grassroots level, at the community level, with religious leaders, with political, which is why a lot of the work that we've done recently is engaging religious and traditional leaders at the grassroots to support our advocacy campaigns, to actually talk to people that, you know, these are women, they have equal rights, they have the right to represent, they have what it takes to serve. Just because they are of a different gender does not make them a lesser leader. So, you know, there is a need to continue having these conversations, and I definitely agree with that.
Absolutely, there's going to be a huge problem there. What we said there, well, cogently put, but this is the thing. People who are against your position, or at least indifferent to it, you see, their attitudes, what they believe, it wasn't necessarily reasoned into them, so it seems reason will not take it out. This is really what you're having to deal with. But let me do something else, because earlier on I introduced you as an ex-politician. You just want to sort of tap into the experience, just generally. How did you see this gender politics? You were within a political party, and you rose to high levels there. Did you feel empowered when you look at the general structure and how things were done? Could you see some of the gaps, you know, in their efforts, in our efforts to
yeah, I mean, before I became a part of partisan politics, and I was, you know, just from the outside as an activist working with women who were already a part of political party structures, I had an idea of what the problems were. I had an idea of what the challenges were. But it was not until when I got into it myself that I was like, wait, this is what these women had to go through? And you have to be really strong to be able to take on that fight and continue with the struggle. And for me, it was not just because I was female. It was because I was female and I was young, because I was 21. So it's a challenge, and from that experience, I know how difficult it is for women in internal political party structures. You look at the political parties that we have around here. You look at their internal leaderships. You look at the executives, the people that handle the decision-making processes, the people that influence the policies and the decisions that are made on behalf of the party. And you can literally count how many of them are women. And even in cases where they do have women, they're the assistants and the deputies. It's like almost there's this notion that is being pushed out there that their position should be secondary to men. So it was a challenge, and I came out of that, you know, more passionate to actually keep supporting the capacity of women, keep giving support to empower more women, to have strengthened capacity to deal with these issues internally and in their political party structures, but also at an external level, in the community level, in other levels that basically have an influence on what they seek to achieve.
So that's it. So you think that stage, that phase is really more important than being in party politics and that sort of thing? Is that what you are saying?
No.
Because from there you left. You could have joined another party.
No. My decision was on was one that was inspired by wanting personal growth, right? So I made a decision that I wanted to get into career development, you know, build on myself, build on my career, because I have other ambitions too. And that leaving political party, partisan politics does not mean that I've entirely stopped. I am working on initiatives and projects that are equally contributing to national development, just not with internal political party structures. And I am 23 when I still have a whole lot of time to come back and say, you know, I want to run for this position. Who knows, I might even run for president. So.
That's it. So you're still political, just not party political.
Exactly.
That's the distinction there.
Just put it that way.
Okay, all right. I'm fine. But one thing I have to say, I've heard this in certain quarters, that people such as yourself, these women's rights and all these activists, in fact, it's more common for me. It's quite worrying because I see myself as a feminist. They say that you are really a mouthpiece for a certain Western agenda there is this liberal, as it were, that left liberal agenda in the West. You realize that even when governments don't follow, as it were, some of their conditionalities, their conditions, and you look at their conditions, they're so tight to these things. They've got their list of 4 or 5 topics. So everything, the funding, everything really depends on that. What do you say about that? That you are a mouthpiece for a Western agenda that has put equality, gender equality at the heart of their development package, their aid package, and the like. And here, our traditional systems, they may look like they are unequal, but this is merely division of labor. Men do this, women do that, so that you have a harmonious society.
Division of labor that is done in such a way that makes women inferior. That's problematic. That's very problematic.
But you would know that some women wouldn't feel that they're inferior. Do you know that?
That's because it's internalized misogyny. It's internalized misogyny. That is what they've been taught. They don't know anything else apart from that. That is what they've been groomed to believe. That is what the patriarchy has taught them. That is what they grew up finding their parents doing. It's like these are a set of rules that you're expected to follow. If you leave these rules, you're either disregarding culture or you're disregarding religion, and you're tagged all these names. And it is very problematic that there's so many women, even in our line of work, you come across women that tell you that it's okay, what they're going through, it's okay, they don't have problems with it, because the misogyny has been internalized. That is all that they've been taught. Now,
that's a very interesting concept you just used.
I would just like to touch on the whole conversation around how this is Western ideology that we are trying to introduce in our country and trying to destroy all the cultural values and the principles that our grandparents and our forefathers fought for, and they try to instill in us and all of that. There is nothing further than the truth than that. I should be in a position as a woman where I want equal opportunities, where I want better, where I want access to opportunities, access to better education, access to leadership, access to all the things that men are privileged to have access to in our society. And it has nothing to do with the white people and what they are trying to, this is basic human rights that we are fighting for.
But this is it.
Basic human rights.
Absolutely. So you talk about you want equality, you want basic human rights and all of that. But you have to also, some would say, these concepts, they are not like trees. They are not out there. They are part of a broader system of intellectual discourse. Mm-hmm. So you are calling this person's circumstances internalized misogyny. Well, that is theory being imposed on circumstances. She wouldn't say that herself. Isn't it? So here, it's very interesting how we conceptualize things. For me, it's taking me back to early feminism, liberation feminism or equality feminism. Well, liberation feminism says, well, if I want my husband to be dominant, why not? that sort of thing.
It's a question of choice.
This is it's a question of choice. But this is it. So don't you think that perhaps the approach, this internalized misogyny, perhaps the approach using these concepts, maybe it's making it difficult really to reach people where we need to reach them?
I think everything needs to be contextualized. Everything has its own context. And when you are trying to change the mindsets of people who have not known anything else but what they've been taught since they were babies, there's a need to bring it down to their level. In a sense that all of these concepts that we talk about, that you and I can sit and have conversations about, are not things that the ordinary Gambian knows. They don't know what patriarchy is. I don't think we even have a word for patriarchy in our local languages.
Absolutely.
So we don't have words for internalized misogyny or sexism in our local languages. So there's a need to actually break it down to the level that they can understand what we are talking about, but also see the significance of the cause that we're trying to champion. And that is why lately, like I said, we've been working a lot with traditional leaders and religious leaders to bring it, to put our message in, to contextualize it in such a way that it can actually make impact and the message can be passed. So I definitely agree. I definitely do agree with that.
Absolutely. And let me just push it a bit. Do you think that women would make better politicians? Better public officials? For instance, if we had more women in public office, the governance would be better.
Well, it's actually a question of competence. It's a question of competence, right? So we've had men in our leadership structures. It has been male-dominated since, decades ago. And we can really debate on whether or not there's been any impact or any meaningful change. Now, to say that this is something that is drastically going to change if we give the leadership to women is a question of competence. But what we are saying is give the opportunities, the positions that you've given to men, to women. Let's test them too. Let's see what the results are going to be. Nobody is saying that change is going to drastically happen overnight, but give them the chance to lead too.
So that's it. Equal opportunity. That's basically what your argument is. That's it. So because one of the fears that I often hear people make, that with the quota system, some people want to create a kind of artificial parity between the two sexes, where competence, experience, sacrifice to mere numbers.
Well, to be very honest, if you look at the numbers that we have right now in our cabinet, in our parliament, in our local government, you literally can count the number of women that are occupying seats in these leadership structures at the different levels of governance. And we can't, the issue here is, it's not about a competition. And I said this yesterday, it's not a competition between these two genders. It's not a competition between men and women. This is people providing intentional solutions to make sure that inclusion is realized, to make sure that just 2 years ago, we had a debate in the parliament, and they were debating whether or not women should have access to creams, skin bleaching creams. Men discussing what women should use on their bodies. Men. So it's really a question of providing. Not even providing, that's like you're giving it away, like you're mainala. You're not maying us. We have been participating. We've been adding our voice. Women have been leading grassroots mobilization. Women have been doing personal fundraising at the grassroots level to support their political parties and their campaigns and their rallies. Women have been participating in their congresses, in their rallies. They travel all over this country trying to pass their political messages to the grassroots to get votes. Women have been voting in immense numbers. The voter registration process in July last year clearly showed how women made up 56.7% of the total people that were registered to vote.
And yet not a single presidential candidate.
Not a single female presidential candidate. So I think the data and the facts that we have clearly shows that we have a problem that needs to be addressed, a fundamental problem that needs to be addressed. But it's very problematic when we come out to say, oh, let's work together, let's come up with strategies and mechanisms to provide solutions to this problem, to ensure that women also have a seat in this parliament. And this quota system we are trying to get introduced, is to provide a solution to a problem. Because even if political parties, like you mentioned earlier on, did come up with seats or tickets for women in certain constituencies, there is no saying if those women are going to win. We're going back to the drawing board. with a parliament that is male dominated and has less than 10 seats that are occupied by a woman. So that is why there's a need to take a more deliberate, a more intentional mechanism or approach to see to it that women have these seats allocated for them in parliament. Now, if there are going to be other women that are going to be added because they've won in their constituencies, that's an added win, to be honest. It's an added win.
Absolutely. So here you're not competing or begging for anything.
We're not begging.
So you're simply adjusting the scales.
Exactly.
So that sort of thing. And you mentioned the skin bleaching thing. For instance, something like that. This is very interesting. Should we have a law against it?
Women should have a right to choose what they want to put on their bodies, whatever that is for them. People have a right to do whatever it is they want with their body. If you want to go natural, that's it. If you want to add on, you know, people should be allowed to make decisions by themselves. Have the liberty to, you know, just sit and think through and, oh, this is what I want to do, you know. Yes, there are complications. So the effort really should have been educating or raising awareness of what skin bleaching does, how it affects women, how it can affect people that actually do it. Now, if women get to know these facts, but they still get to make an informed, they're able to make an informed choice on whether or not they're going to do it. It's not for people to table it before Parliament to have men decide for women whether or not this is something that they should do.
Yes, and see, that's interesting. You've just made a case for being a staunch liberal. But the staunch liberal wants to introduce quotas on us. So in your work, in your activism, as it were, all these years, what factors have you encountered and you've labeled them as enabling or the disabling factors? I think we've been touching on the disabling stuff, but looking on the other side, are there any positive bits, the enabling stuff that you think you can tap into and change things and contribute at least?
Yes, I think the space, the democratic space has opened up a lot, especially since 2017 with the new government. It has opened up a lot in the sense that, you know, they've been more deliberate efforts by CSOs, by international partners, in partnership, in collaboration with the government and political parties. Recently with the Inter-Party Committee, they've done a lot. In October last year, they launched the women's branch of the Inter-Party Committee. So there's been efforts, a series of coordinated efforts from different fronts that are actually geared towards registering meaningful impact in this cause that we've been championing for the past couple of years. So the democratic space has opened a lot, and it has provided opportunities for people to pump in their ideas, to pump in their money, their funds, to actually support these women, provide capacity building trainings for them. In 2017, we saw an increase of the number of women, particularly young women and young people that actually wanted to contest for parliament. And right now, we're seeing a lot of women come out to say we're going to contest for the parliamentary election. So it has opened up, which has allowed people to pump in their resources to support in building the capacities of these women, but also building the capacities of political parties to be more inclusive in their internal processes. So that is something
that sort of thing. Do you see a corresponding move, as it were, in attitudes and norms, the home bit? These are the structural, as it were, state structural systems, granted, but as well the other aspect of it as well, really, is about the norms, you know, what you should do, and the attitudes, what I want to do, as it were. Have you seen a corresponding move, just even anecdotally?
I mean,
you know,
slightly. I would say slightly. I come from a family where we are allowed to make our choices, you know, even though, you know, you're guided, you're advised and all of that. But I come from a very religious family, and we're always advised, but we're allowed to make our own choices. But even myself, I sometimes have to go through instances where, you know, they take a strong stance and say, lead def halenga amagulojikar wala lead, you know, certain
Absolutely.
things like that. So even whereas there've been slight change, it is still, you know, almost as the same as it was decades ago.
Absolutely. But again, you will see that, oh, I'm not sure about decades ago. Oh, decades ago, you should have known what was here. I mean, just back in the 70s or even 60s or the 70s, they would tell you that a woman, you cannot wear trousers. They would label you, stigma. But look at it. Within a period, it has changed. This is how cultures evolve in many ways.
But there's still households where you can't wear trousers.
Oh, absolutely. You're certainly going to have that. But the general trust, as it were, would be that now we don't frown on it. Nobody says anything anymore in the streets. Oh, God asked the women who lived during those times. So now, you see, there's another argument. We don't like saying it much. There's something about some African intellectuals. You see, with most of these things, the so-called liberal agenda, some people have brought in class into it. When you look at educated people, it is really in educated people and all of that. You tend to see that women go to school. In Banjul, we even lived through that in many ways. The first people who went to school, the first women, their parents were Akus, who were educated, and then afterwards everybody took on. So your battle is this, some people will say, that for us to have that critical mass in our population who are aware and sensitive to these gender issues, you better increase your middle class.
I mean...
You see how, as I said, this is why maybe social change is extremely difficult and it's a generational game. So this is it. So for me, when I talk to activists, once you've got this perspective, then perhaps you can ask yourself, what is it I can do now? Don't overburden yourself with certain things that will never happen. You will just die and leave them there, and somebody else will have to pick up the baton. What do you think?
I actually tell a lot of women, especially young women, because when I got into leadership, when I got into the civic space, I was very young. I was a teenager. And one thing that I concentrated on was building my social capital, building my experience. And this is an advice that I give to a lot of women all the time. Like, wherever you find yourself, whatever situation you find yourself, always capitalize on building your social capital, building on your experience, building on, things that can actually help guide you, or can help you climb the ladder. And this has brought me so many opportunities at my age. And it will bring the same opportunities for all the other women who also do this. And yes, all these challenges that we face, there are certain challenges that I could have gone through in our society, in this country, that I am not going through right now because I have built financial independence, let's say. I've built my social capital, let's say. But there are women that would go through these issues because of economic reasons, because of social reasons. So yes, there is a recognition that that women are advised, but it's not a must for women to do this. It is a must for society to change. It is a must for conditions to be better for these women, but it is not a must for women to say, or in order for me to not be sexually violated, let's say, I need to have economic independence. You get? So it's a complex situation. It's a complex situation.
It is. So now we are heading towards the end now. When you look at the enabling factors and the disabling factors, as an activist, how do you strategize? Then strategy comes into it if you want to have any effect, isn't it? So how do you strategize?
Right. I think one of the reasons that as a collective, feminists, that women's rights activists that have been working in this space for a long time, one of the reasons that we've been coming together and trying to be more intentional in our approach is that there's been a recognition that we've been fighting for this for so long, and maybe we should rethink our approach. Maybe we should rethink our strategies. Maybe we should, contextualize the problem in such a way that when we do our advocacy or when we introduce initiatives, it will yield impact on different levels. So for the past couple of years, since 2017, what we've been doing is we know that it's very hard to go to these political parties and say, pick this woman, pick that woman, take them and give them your card, your ticket to contest under your party. So what we've been doing is we've been identifying these women that are very vocal, that have what it takes, that have the intention to run, to actually train them, to build on their capacity, on resource mobilization, which is very important for effective campaign plan, on setting a goal, having an agenda, knowing what they want to achieve, when they want to achieve, having an action plan. So the training is done in such a way that it is very effective, that when they go back to their political parties, it is them using their own voices to say, we are here, we want your ticket, we are going to apply for it. And right now we have a lot of them that are applying for their party's tickets to run for the parliamentary election. And this has been very effective. It has proven to be very effective, and we intend to continue with these trainings. But also lobbying our stakeholders in parliament. These are people that come back to their constituents to say, vote for us. We want to go back to parliament. We want to keep representing you. Using that as an entry point to lobby them, to say, women, vote for you. So we're here to ask that you also consider these women and pass this into a law. So right now, that is what we are doing. We are lobbying them, and a lot of them have been very forthcoming. They've been very supportive to us so far. So lobbying our stakeholders, but also making sure that we form collaborations with political parties, because they play, if not the most significant part in all of this. So lobbying them, working together with them, building their internal capacity in such a way that they're more inclusive. When they go for their party congresses, they recognize the need to not just give assistant and secondary positions to women.
Yes. Can you train leadership? I'm just being naughty here. You know, the old question, born or made, that sort of, obviously, one must go some kind of training. There will always be that training element involved. And yet, that's not enough, because in the end, you see that some are successful within certain limits. others are not. But that's really a slightly different point. The lobbying bit, I mean, because when I read Satang Nabana's piece, she was mentioning something like having a private member's bill. I wonder, in your interaction, or perhaps in your lobbying with National Assembly, has anything like that tried? What is the feeling like within our National Assembly? Or are we waiting until April? These ones are really on their way out. Would anybody go and present this private member's bill to
So on the 10th, February 10th, Honorable Fatmata Njai of Banjul South is going to present the constitutional amendment bill to introduce a quota system. It will go through its first reading on February 10th and its second reading on February 17th. So it has already, the parliamentary scrutiny process on this bill has already started. So we are now waiting for April. Let's see how it turns out.
Okay, so it's going before the parliament.
Yes.
So that's it. And you people, what resources do you have? You know, in your work, as it were, where do you get resources? Because some people will actually say that, or you see, they get most of their funding from
white people.
Absolutely.
Yep.
So they, you know, if you pay the piper, then you know you select the tune, isn't it? So, but this is the key, and it matters for your independence. Where you get your resources? Where do you get your resources for your programs and projects? And
we apply for funding. We apply for funding from international partners, from donor partners. You know, we send concept notes and budget proposals, and if it falls within what they are mandated to do or what their project goal seeks to achieve, then they provide the funding. So we identify what projects we want to do, and then we send in a budget and a proposal and say, you know, do you mind taking a look at this? And then,
but how much? What about you? Do you sort of have fundraising? How much is the Gambia, or Gambians as it were, how much is generated from within compared to the international institutions and all the
Basically, everything we do comes from international partners. Almost all of it. Well, all of it comes from international partners. So.
Does it put certain restrictions on what you can do or say and
In my experience, no. It doesn't put any restrictions. It doesn't have any conditions. So they, when you have access to the funding, you're given a timeline. So let's say the project will run for 1 year. So you have reporting quotas. So let's say after every quarter, you're supposed to send in a report to say this is what we've done, this is what we've achieved, this has been the outputs, the inputs, the outcomes, and all of that. And then you send them your financial report to show that the money has been spent on what it is supposed to be spent on. So that is basically just it.
Absolutely. But I wonder though, when, for instance, a 1-year project, when it ends,
sustainability.
then what happens?
Sustainability.
So they all just crumble.
That has been the biggest problem that civil society is faced with in the country. Because when the donors, when their project with you ends, if they have another project that is different from what you're working on, you don't have access to that funding again. So there is a problem with sustainability. That is why a lot of CSOs, you see them doing a lot for a while and then they go dormant because they don't have funding. And I know that the National Youth Council works closely with registered youth organizations to ensure that they have access to, resources to be able to implement their activities, but it's not enough. It's really not enough.
So one wonders, then what is the effectiveness in the longer term of these projects?
I think there needs to be, as a collective, as civil society organizations, we really need to make use of Tango or the CSO coalition to really just sit and strategize on how we're going to have more effective ways of raising funds, but also in such a way that it is going to be sustained throughout our project phases. So when you're doing, but the problem with civil society also is the lack of foresight. Not all of them, but some. That you want to do 1 or 2, 3, 4 activities, and then that's it. Before you come up with other activities, it's a year past. You're trying to come up with something else. So it's a very big problem that we really need to have conversations around on the issue of sustainability, on the issue of effective resource mobilization, on the issue of being very intentional in our planning. In ways that we don't necessarily have to do projects for 2 months and then nobody hears from us for another 2 years.
That's it. And perhaps a bit of people mobilization, having a mass membership and the contributions, that's self-sustaining.
Mr. Mboch, that is something that is very difficult because a lot of the work, when you work in civil society spaces, people think that, oh, you have all the money. You're basically paid based on projects. So say you're working on a project for like 3 months and you're paid for those 3 months. There is literally no project again for the next 1 year. You're not paid for that 1 year. So it's very difficult to recruit people into CSOs because these are young people that actually have goals. They have responsibilities. You cannot just recruit them and you're like, oh, so I'm a project na la fay, so I'm a project na then talk new Holland. So that's problematic. So it's very difficult because a lot of these young people, including myself, left CSOs to go work for international organizations because it's not sustainable. It's really not sustainable.
Yes, finally, this is it. Pragmatic will versus the structural impedimenta. And here the structural, I will include our attitudes, our norms, as it were, that form our stuff, which brings us to youth. Yes, the other day I was invited by a youth group. I'm not going to mention names. I was supposed to moderate. It didn't start on time. I said, oh no, I thought our youth would improve on us. And I was just telling somebody this morning, I said, God, you kids, I mean, I really rely on you to change here. When I take my generation and everybody else, come on, we are mainly corrupt. Youth, the responsibility of youth. Earlier on I talked about resource. Surely, that's the biggest resource. When you look at youth, today, your generation and the like, when you talk to them, are you all feeling the same spirit? Not we all, but mainly that critical mass as we're talking about, feeling the spirit of change, as it were. Are they politicized in that way, do you reckon?
I think what's needed is attitudinal change. A lot of young people, you know, sometimes we actually talk a lot about how the system has failed us, how the structures have failed us, but a lot of us fail to take it upon ourselves to actually change what has been normalized for us growing up, to recognize that this is something that does not work. And if you want to see the change that we want in our country, we must take it upon ourselves to change ourselves, to change how we do things, to change how we think about things. And I think young people are still trying to adapt to it. You know, even though they've been remarkable progress, but young people are still trying to adapt to this. So it may take time, but we will get there.
Absolutely. For one to say, it's a very curious area, the relationship between the individual and the institution, you know, whatever is there. You see, the institution is us, the human beings, but yet the institution also dictates what we do. So it's a kind of feedback relationship. So perhaps it is important for young people to see their role in this.
Exactly.
If you don't go in there to change things, then...
And it's actually how we have conversations around young people that choose to not participate. And we are like, if you do not participate and get into these structures, because when I chose to join political party systems, they were like, oh, you're too young, and I'm like, we're all here wanting to see change. But until we recognize the fact that there is a need for us to take up the challenge, to also participate in these processes, not just participate by going out to vote, but adding our voice, making sure that we hold our leaders accountable, making sure that we participate in national processes, the parliamentary scrutiny processes, adding our voice, holding our leaders up to the challenge, then we are not really serious about what we want to see change in this country. So it's very critical that we start having these conversations and just reflect as young people, reflect on what our roles are, in what ways we are contributing to the consolidation of these problems that we already have existing in our societies.
That's it. Right now, the future. Are you engaged in any interesting projects or for the future? What are you up to now?
Yes, so right now I work with the National Democratic Institute, and we are working with different CSOs. We're also providing support to the Inter-Party Committee. Yes, so we are trying to support CSOs on different areas to consolidate democracy, to promote open governance, promote election observation, and all of that. And on a personal level, I would also continue working with women to, you know, continue supporting their political ambitions, and would also be working on my career development until I am ready to come back and run for president.
Absolutely, that's an interesting one.
Yep.
We'll be looking forward to that. Fantastic there. You've been a brilliant and articulate guest. You know, proud of you as a representative of our youth.
Thank you very much.
Yes, I think today I will end with a very interesting quote from John Fitzgerald Kennedy, that famous president in the U.S. When he said, when his society faced a problem, he said, "Our answer is to rely on youth." And he gave this interesting definition of it. Youth not as a time of a life, but a state of mind, a temper of the will, a quality of imagination, a predominance of courage over timidity, of the appetite for adventure over the love of ease. Thank you very much. Until next time, I'm Goodbye.